All right, let's get right into it. I mean, every single week you see a new headline screaming that the US dollar's about to completely collapse. But today, we're not going to look at politics. We're not going to look at predictions. We're going to break down the actual logic of the global financial system, the pipes and the plumbing, to figure out what's really going on.
So let's just ask the big question head on, right? The one that gets all the clicks. Is the US dollar actually dying? It sounds like a simple question, but the answer? Well, it's kind of locked up in a system that's way more complex than most people think.
Okay, now this is the chart everyone throws around. This is Exhibit A for the whole dollar collapse argument. You can see that back in the 90s, the dollar was over 70% of the world's central bank reserves. Fast forward today, and that number slipped down to around 58%. On the surface, that looks like a pretty clear trend downwards, right? Well, hold that thought. Because then you see this number, and this is where that simple story just falls apart. Today, a whopping 88% of all global currency trades still involve the US dollar. So wait a minute, how can both of these things be true? How can the world be holding fewer dollars in its savings account, but using them more than ever for actual trade? That contradiction? That's where the real story is.
Yeah, to figure this out, we have to look past all the headlines and get into the system's plumbing. So let's forget politics for a second and just talk about how things actually work.
The whole thing really comes down to one powerful idea, the network effect. Think about it. Why are you on YouTube or WhatsApp? It's not necessarily because the tech is perfect. It's because that's where everybody else is. The dollar is exactly the same. It's not the best currency, it's just the one everyone's already on. It has critical mass. And that network is incredibly sticky for two huge practical reasons. First up, invoicing. If a farmer in Brazil wants to sell coffee to someone in Germany, that deal is almost certainly getting priced in dollars. The entire world of commodities, oil, copper, wheat, it all runs on a dollar price tag. And the second big one? Debt. Trillions and trillions of dollars in loans to foreign governments and companies are all owed in US dollars.
I mean, just get a load of this number, 26 trillion US dollars. And that's all sitting in bank accounts outside of the United States. You'll hear people call this the Eurodollar system. It sounds complicated, but it's really just a fancy name for US dollars held in banks abroad. It's a massive, massive ocean of dollar debt and cash that's sloshing around the world.
So all of this creates what you could call the dollar debt trap. And look, it's not some evil, malicious plan. It's a logistical trap. If you owe money in dollars, you have to earn dollars to pay it back. And to earn dollars, you have to sell your stuff in the dollar system. It's this powerful feedback loop that's just incredibly hard to break out of. You can't just flip a switch and decide to quit. Okay, so that self-reinforcing loop brings us to the really deep logic here. This is the part that, honestly, almost all the hot takes you see online completely miss. And it's this paradox, the paradox of what it actually means to be the world's reserve currency. This whole thing is called the Triffin Dilemma, and it is absolutely crucial. See, to be the world's banker, you have to pump your currency out into the world. That means you have to run huge trade deficits. You buy more than you sell. You also have to have wide open markets so money can flow in and out easily, and a legal system everyone trusts. Now look at the other side. Is China, the biggest supposed challenger, willing to do that? Are they going to stop being the world's factory? Let money just pour out of the country freely? The answer is a huge no. The truth is, nobody actually wants this job. And this really gets to the heart of what's called the safe asset problem. When a country like Japan or Saudi Arabia earns trillions from their exports, they can't just hide that cash under a mattress. They need a safe, gigantic, liquid place to park it. And right now, the US Treasury market, it's the only parking lot in the world that's big enough to handle all that cash. There's nothing else even close. Okay, so if the plumbing is that strong and that entrenched, then why is everyone suddenly talking about de-dollarization? Well, it's because even though all that old logic is still true, something huge happened in 2022. A key part of the whole equation just shifted.
Yeah, this was the moment. February 2022. The US and its allies did something nobody really thought was on the table. They froze hundreds of billions of dollars of Russia's central bank reserves. It's like they just reached out and hit the delete button on a massive chunk of a major country's savings account.
And that one move, wow, it sent a shockwave through literally every central bank on the planet. It was this sudden, terrifying realization that your dollar reserves, they aren't really your money. They're more like a permission slip from the US government, a permission slip that can be torn up at any moment for any reason. Every finance minister on the world had to sit up and ask, wait,
Could we be next?
So what was the reaction? Well, it wasn't to try and sink the dollar. No, it was to start building lifeboats. You're seeing central banks buy up gold at record rates because gold is nobody else's liability. And, maybe even more important, you're seeing them build brand new financial plumbing. Projects like Enbridge let countries settle trades directly with each other, completely bypassing the US-controlled SWIFT system that underpins almost everything.
So, where does all this leave us? Well, it means we're moving out of an era of just total, absolute dollar dominance, and we're entering a new era, an era of real financial competition.
And look, we have to be honest about the biggest vulnerability here, the elephant in the room, the U.S. national debt. At nearly $39 trillion and climbing, the rest of the world is starting to quietly wonder if the U.S. can actually afford to pay its bills over the long run. If global creditors ever lose faith and stop buying U.S. debt, that's when the whole system gets into serious trouble. This is the dollar's real Achilles heel.
Which brings us to the new strategy you're seeing play out across the globe. You know, the old way of thinking was all about how do we replace the dollar. The new thinking, which is a lot smarter, is how do we build systems to bypass the dollar when we need to. It's not about a direct confrontation, it's about building options.
So, what's the bottom line? The dollar isn't going to collapse into dust tomorrow. That's not the real story. What's happening is we're slowly moving into a much more complex, multipolar world for money. A world where, yeah, you'll still use dollars to buy oil, but maybe you'll use the Chinese yuan to buy your electronics, and maybe you'll hold gold as your ultimate savings.
Okay, so let's bring this all home. What does all this big, global, geopolitical stuff actually mean for you? How do you apply this logic to your own finances, your own life?
All right, here are 3 logical takeaways. Number 1, don't panic. Don't go betting on some sudden overnight collapse. As we've seen, the plumbing is just too sticky for that. Number 2, it probably makes sense to diversify your own savings into assets that can't just be printed into oblivion. You know, things like gold, real estate, maybe a business. And number 3, keep your eyes on the new tech. Things like central bank digital currencies and these new payment systems like Enbridge, that's the plumbing of the future.
And all that leaves us with one final question to think about. You know, central banks all over the world are busy asking themselves what their reserve assets should be beyond just the dollar. So it's probably a good time to ask yourself the same question. In this new, more competitive era, what is your personal reserve asset? What do you really trust to hold its value no matter what happens?